Hello, so this is Catherine with another professional video of my quilts. We've just clocked over to spring, so Christina, my youngest, said that she didn't want this quilt on her bed for the next 6 months or so. Well, she'll be moving out by then, but she's warm enough now at night. So this is king-size quilt-ish that I finished this year at some point. It took me, I can't remember if it was I think it's taken me 7 years to make this. I found a template for the hexagons online from a website, from a blog that doesn't seem to exist anymore. I lost it halfway through construction, so I had to keep my template very safe. So I do all the cutting, I print it out, I did all the cutting, and then I did the cutting of the fabric around. As you can see, if I put my hand for context, you can see the flower shape there. They're quite small, so I think that they're probably about 4 centimeters diagonal, maybe 2 inches. Gosh, not even 2 inches. 3/8, something like that. But in centimeters, maybe 4 centimeters, maybe 5. The quilting I've done mostly with this hexagon shape, with pearl cotton in again a range of blues that I bought in Guatemala in Chichicastenango. There are a few lines where I forgot my personality and I thought, oh, I'll put grey lines because that will be restful. And it was grey verticals. Was it vertical diagonals? Grey diagonals, and it was the most boring thing ever, so I just stopped. And I was much happier changing all the different shades of blue and doing the hexagons. And the quilt's for me, so it doesn't matter if I make design decisions that kind of change the look a little bit. The bias, I was still kind of aiming for straight edges, although I did, as I'm filming, I noticed that there is a little bump here. Everything hand stitched. And one of the lovely things about this is that there is a section where I recognize this sort of amorphous, you can't see it, you really need distance to see it, but around there's quite an amorphous area, and I recognize it as the area that I was doing in Peru. When I quilt as well, I use those bent clips that are specially for quilting, and I don't use a hoop, I don't use a frame, I just do it on my lap. This is the back with one of my favorite fabrics, which I have very few precious scraps. So this is a vintage bed sheet from a second-hand shop with a beautiful blue and sky blue flower roses. A little bit of grey, which is kind of a little bit unusual for me, but kind of appearing a bit more now, here and there. And some other bed sheets, a little bit of an interesting corner because it wasn't quite the right shape. And I've talked in the past about this other fabric as well, which is like that vintage blue. It's a vintage pink and it's very pretty. And I love, as I've said before, that I now have like families of quilts that kind of share fabrics. The last thing I want to show you is my label. So again, as always, I try and incorporate Spanish because it's important, my children being bilingual. Todo a mano, my name and Port Chalmers. Todo a mano means all by hand, because that's important to me. I should say that I always use either wool. I'm trying to move away from cotton, frankly. So if I'm buying new things, I can't really afford or justify buying organic cotton. It's just so much more money. So I try and just buy second-hand cotton, old preferably, vintage, not precious old, but just vintage, 10, 20, 30, 40 years old. But I do use wool, or I feel like wool's a better choice for batting in New Zealand because we are sheep country. And I don't use that pre-needled stuff. It just doesn't seem necessary to me. I think if you were using a black batting, it might be helpful because then it's less likely to kind of poke through. But anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you're encouraged to try your hand at quilting. You don't necessarily have to make a quilt quite as ginormous as this. Have a good week. Hello, it's me again. All right, I've decided to do 2 quilts in this video, otherwise I'm going to be here forever. This is a quilt that I made for Sophia when she was about 16. We went to Europe on a holiday when she was 16 instead of going to Peru because my dad was actually visiting my sisters who all live in Europe. Actually, they might have all been living in England at the time for the first time in years, or in the UK in any case. Anyway, in New Zealand there is a bed size which is called king single, which I don't know if it exists anywhere else. It didn't exist in England at the time that I was aware when we lived there. Anyway, the children have king single beds, which is longer than a single and wider than a single. I think it's long, so it's very comfortable. All right, so things that I did, all the decisions that I made for this quilt. So Sophia is my daughter that really likes, she's not my bohemian daughter, shall we say. So I was really aware that I needed to make something a bit more classical for her. So I went with the flying geese, and shock horror, we went to a quilt shop in Amsterdam, which I really hadn't been to before because they are very expensive and I can't quite justify it generally, and they sell new cottons, so I don't do that. But anyway, I bought this. I knew Sophia would like it. I mean, she was with us in the shop, although not terribly interested at the time. But she really liked it. I bought some, I was guessing, because of course, you know, I don't like to measure. I guessed how much I would need, and then I was short. So I just changed the design in my head so that I could have these strips of white with the flying geese at the top. And that, I think that made quite a nice, can you see at the bottom, quite a nice little design feature. The other thing as well is I was starting my love affair with mustard, so I decided that the binding could be mustard because it was only a little bit, and so even if Sophia didn't like it, it was fine. And then I used more thread from Chichicastenango in just one blue, if I remember correctly, for her. And I also decided to do some red quilting because Sophia's a huge fan of Taylor Swift, and she had an album called Red. I'm not sure when the album came out, but Sophia was a huge fan, and she went busking. She used to play lots of musical instruments, and she was busking so that she would save up enough money so that we could both go to Auckland, because she knew it was an extravagant thing to do, and she probably saved about 70% of the tickets and the flights, and I topped up the rest, which is pretty amazing for someone her age. So yeah, I started out by measuring my quilting lines and sort of drawing lines and then losing the will. And I find it really interesting that how your eye can actually really help you to make pretty straight lines, even if you don't measure and mark with a ruler. Especially when you have kind of a geometric design. So, you know, I could be guided by where I was aiming to get to. This was not too slow a project anyway. It's got wool batting. I try and buy wool batting if I can, or as they say in America, wadding, I think, or maybe it's vice versa. I can't remember now. It's difficult to keep up with the different terminologies. Now the back is a strippy. So in the UK, I think it's in Cumbria, and maybe in Wales as well, there is a tradition of strippy quilts. And I think they probably came about because it's a cheaper construction. It's not fiddly, therefore it takes less time. You're not wasting fabric because you're just stripping the meters. You can probably tear your fabric, so definitely a much faster process. I was really keen on these because when I discover a passion, I really dive deep and I do a lot of research and I just love them. So I really wanted to incorporate that. And when it was done, I really was not happy with how the quilting from the front had shown up. I mean, you can see the front because the sun's shining, even with the curtains drawn. But I'm actually really happy. I look at it today and I think this is great. It's kind of a little bit quirky, but not too much. So Sophia can actually enjoy it still. I think the binding looks pretty. Look, I think you can see a knot poking through. I hide my knots, obviously not that great. And last but not least, it's the label. Again, I tend to use embroidery for my labels. I try to use them in Spanish. Sometimes I think I've done a bilingual one, but that's a lot of effort. My biggest priority is that they're in Spanish. So it's in Spanish. And I love that I ran out of space, so I had to do the A for Barriga off to one side. Lots of kisses. And I didn't show this in Spanish, but can you see how in the past I have done a mitered corner? Which I think I'm going to move away from. I really liked that other style that I learnt. So that's it. This is quilt number 2. I think if I do 2 quilts per time, I'll be done in maybe 3 videos. I haven't quilted that much because it does take a while. So anyway, I hope you're inspired. I hope you enjoy them. Let me know if you have any queries. Have a good week. Bye.